It's regime change, plain and simple. And the reasons for that is because, Western financial and corporate powers want to have a regime in power that will open the gates of the city of Troy to their Trojan horses, primarily their banking and corporate interests. My money would be on the possibility that they told them, look, you go against us, we're going to kill your whole family. Your children, your grandchildren, we'll kill all of them. And, if the other side is good at one thing, they're good at killing people. And, the fact that he's the president is not an obstacle in any sense. They've killed JFK, they killed RFK. For British intelligence agencies, triggering war is like drinking water for us. It's nothing to them.
Hi everybody, Paul Buitink here for Reinvent Money, a podcast about money and power. Today on the show, market analyst, author and former hedge fund manager Alex Krainer. Hi Alex, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Paul. Good to be with you today.
Yeah, I want to better understand your position on who is really in charge in power in the West. But let's first talk a bit about the ongoing war between Israel and Iran and or perhaps the West and East in general. First question, do you believe Iran wants to have a nuclear weapon?
I don't really. I think that nuclear weapons today are not even necessary. I think that with the advent of hypersonic, precision-guided missiles, nuclear weapons become obsolete because the only thing that nuclear weapon adds to the mix is massive collateral damage. So if you're going to target something, say a military base, an intelligence center, any kind of a strategic node of the enemy military power, you can be very effective with hypersonic precision-guided missiles, and then you can take out those targets without causing massive civilian casualties. So in this sense, nuclear weapons are maybe only useful as a deterrent to be able to respond to threats in kind. Let's take Iran, for example. If Iran were to drop a nuclear bomb on Israel, on Tel Aviv or Haifa, or, they probably wouldn't on Jerusalem, they would end up taking out a whole lot of Jewish people and a whole lot of Palestinians. Probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And then there's also the nuclear fallout, the contamination that would, make the area unlivable for a considerable period of time. Whereas with precision-guided hypersonic missiles, they can take out military targets, strategic targets. They can weaken their enemy's ability to defend themselves without causing a lot of civilian casualties. So it's a much, much better weapon. It's much more effective. And it has the advantage of not drawing world condemnation to yourself and getting the people who are responsible for it pursued as war criminals. So for those reasons, I believe that Iranians don't really want that. But, they want to take advantage of their position of being a nuclear threshold state, which means that they can probably create a nuclear weapon in a relatively short period of time, to negotiate for a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. That means demanding that Israel give up their nuclear weapons as well.
Yeah, because that would be my follow-up question. Like, if they don't want to have a nuclear weapon, why do they still enrich all the way to 60%, even though they only need like a few percent in order to use it for energy purposes? So your point is they still need to get close to the weapon just to have leverage.
Yeah, I think that's their reason. But I think that the whole discussion about Iran's nuclear weapons is almost the same playbook as Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. It's actually irrelevant. If the Western powers were worried about Iran having a nuclear weapon, that problem could have been taken care of a long time ago. Iranians have already said they don't want the nuclear weapons. They've already offered, hey, we will commit to never develop nuclear weapons, provided that you can remove the threat from Israel as well. So if peace and stability in the region were even a consideration, that problem could have been taken care of for a very, very low cost without the need for these mutual missile attacks between Israel and Iran, and without the risk of the whole collective West getting enmeshed in another world war. The whole objective of the game is exactly the same as it was in Syria, as it was in Iraq, as it was in Afghanistan, and that's the regime change, as it was in Libya. It's regime change, plain and simple. And the reasons for that is because, Western financial and corporate powers want to have a regime in power that will open the gates of the city of Troy to their Trojan horses, primarily their banking and corporate interests. For as long as there's an independent government in Tehran that wants to be sovereign, that wants to use their country's natural resource wealth for the benefit of their own country and their own people, the West will find one pretext or another to try to stage a regime change operation, a coup, military, whatever it takes to bring a different government to Tehran. It's always the same, one and the same playbook, one and the same objective. We've seen it in Ukraine. They're trying to do it in Russia. They tried to do it in Kazakhstan, in Belarus. It's always the same thing everywhere in the world. Western powers need subservient, subordinated governments everywhere in the world, but especially in resource-rich areas of the world.
Yeah, it feels very much like 2003 all over again, with Netanyahu playing the same role. In 53, I believe it was, we successfully did a regime change in Iran with the Operation AJAX, and it was also the British business interest behind it. I believe BP, back in the day, Anglo-Iranian oil company, they successfully did a regime change. You think they are hoping to do the same again? That maybe think in their own hubris, they think, well, we were successful in 53, we could pull it off again.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. But what we need to recognize today is that all these corporations, BP and Exxon and Royal Dutch Shell and whatever else we might find, these multinational corporations, they don't have the main incentive for colonialism and conquest and regime change and all these wars. It's the banking interests that are behind them. And the reason for that is because, BP and Shell and ExxonMobil, whatever company you might name, they don't have to conquer an area by force to do profitable business. They could just as well purchase Iranian crude oil as exports from Iran. They can buy it from Iranian companies that develop the resources, extract the oil, and put them on ships and send them west. And then the Western corporations can simply buy that, bring it to their markets, add their margin on top, and have a brilliant, profitable business off of that. The only group in this economic food chain that gets nothing unless they control the region by force are the bankers. Because what happens if, let's say, BP goes into Iran and develops Iranian oil resources? What's going to happen is that they're going to need funding for that. They might need $1 billion, $2 billion, whatever. I don't know what the number is. They're going to need a considerable amount of money, and they're going to borrow that money from their bankers. And so their bankers are going to lend them, let's say, $1 billion. And that $1 billion loan in that moment becomes an asset on the bank's balance sheet. and it becomes a performing asset, a profitable asset on the bank's balance sheet. So by virtue of and let's recognize in this arrangement, the oil company is the client of the bank, and the oil company's debt becomes the bank's asset. And so by virtue of having political control of a country like Iran, Iran's natural resources become assets on those banks' balance sheets, and they become profitable assets because now they're going to have to be repaid with interest. And the loan is going to be secured by Iranian oil resources. So, while the corporation itself has choices about the business model they pursue, they can import the oil, they can also take a loan from an Iranian bank. They can come in and say, look, we have the know-how, we have the technical abilities, you're going to need to fund that. So maybe an Iranian bank can issue them $1 billion loan. To the corporations, it's all the same. Dollars from Iranian bank, dollars from a British or American bank, it doesn't matter. They are after profits. But for the bank, it's the zero-sum game. It's, if those assets, that natural resource wealth, is on an Iranian bank's balance sheet, then it's not on let's say JP Morgan's or Goldman Sachs's balance sheet. So this is ultimately where the incentive for conquest, for regime changes, for colonization originates. And then if you look at the boards of directors of these companies like BP and Shell and Halliburton, whatever you have, you'll always find that somebody on their board of directors is also on the board of directors of Goldman Sachs or Citigroup or Barclays Bank or something like that. So these interlocking directorates are actually what defines the strategy of the whole Western model of governance, which then always exports these revolutions and in effect foments colonialism on other nations. It's the banks ultimately.
Yeah, we'll talk about the banks a bit more later. Another question about the conflict in Iran. I do know quite a few Iranians. Actually talked to one of them earlier this week. He fled the country when he was 15. He's now 44. He really hates the Ayatollah regime, and he knows a lot of Iranians here in Holland and also in other countries that hate him. At the same time, they are not happy with what Israel is doing either, right? Because at some point they actually consider rallying behind the flag because they don't like their country to be bombarded. At the same time, there's this huge continent of people that would like to see a regime change. Is there another way to eventually do that other than what Israel is trying to do at the moment?
Well, for this particular gentleman, if he wants to see a regime change in Iran, he should go to Iran and he should agitate for it. It's one thing to not like your government and to try to push against that government or to try to affect political change in your country. It's a different thing altogether to agitate and lobby in order to get Western nations to go affect a regime change in your country. And then, I would challenge that gentleman to show me one example in the world, anywhere, where Western regime change has improved another country's social, economic performance, improved the standard of living of the people. You don't have to go far. You can go to Libya, you can go to Congo, Syria, you can go to Ukraine, you can go to Angola, Nigeria, Niger, Botswana, any country. You bring a Western-sponsored regime, and you're going to see your country turn into a colony with all the social diseases, economic decay, infrastructure decay that you see everywhere else. Western powers have colonized much of Africa for more than 100 years. And everywhere in Africa, even though the countries are very, very resource rich, the populations are living in misery, in destitute poverty. Schools, healthcare, infrastructure, everything is non-existent or in decay. Most people don't have electricity, let alone things like internet and so forth. I lived in Venezuela part of my life. Venezuela is one of the nations with the biggest oil reserves in the world. And I say one of, if you go by the books, it's the most oil-rich nation in the world. But I don't trust those tallies. At any rate, I lived there in the 1990s, so before Hugo Chavez took over. 80% of the whole population was below the poverty line. So that's your Western-sponsored governments, which, their whole function is to transfer the nation's resource wealth to Western centers of power. And then the people who are, close to those flows of wealth, they usually get some crumbs off the table, so they get to, they get to have their houses in Miami and in London and in Switzerland and boats in the south of France and stuff like that. But the vast majority of the people in those countries suffer. So, if you want to regime change a country, go there and do your best. Don't agitate for NATO and United States and Britain and France to go and bombard the country so that, you might get something that you think is better.
Yeah, perhaps the last, perhaps a good regime change was the US beating the Nazis and helping us out here in the West. As a Dutchman, I welcomed that. But afterwards, it's been a series of unsuccessful ones with leading to a lot of damage and mess and destruction in those countries.
Yeah, yes, you're right. But it's basically the Soviets who beat the Nazis. The Americans turned out for the parade at the very end.
Yeah, well, in Holland, it was primarily the Americans and the Canadians.
Oh, right, in Holland, yes, yes.
Yeah. But I agree. In the East, of course, it was the Soviets with great human casualty. Then we do see a lot of attacks going back and forth with the Ayatollah Khamenei on a daily basis, threatening with a big response. But it seems like the number of rockets coming from Iran, they're going down on a daily basis. Did you expect like a fierce response anytime soon, the coming days, or what's the strategy here from Iran?
I don't really know. It does seem that the number of rockets is less than the first and the second day. But I also seen that the Israelis have very effectively cracked down on reporting of these things. So they have forbidden people to post the footage of the rockets landing and of the impact and of the aftermath online. So there's a bit of an information blackout from Israel. So I'm not sure what is the actual state of things. Did the Iranians reduce the intensity of attacks, or did the Israelis reduce the intensity of the reporting, or if it's maybe a bit of both? It seems obvious to me that the Iranians are very effectively striking at Israeli strategic assets. The ports, the Mossad headquarters, not Ben Gurion, Ben Gurion Airport, and it seems that they're inflicting real, actual pain on the Israelis, because something that surfaced yesterday was a scream fest between Ben Gvir and the one of the heads, or the head of the Mossad. And I'm not, it's in Hebrew, so I don't understand what is being said. But according to the translation posted, Ben Gvir is screaming at the Mossad guy, "Why did you provoke Iran?" And the Mossad guy screams back saying, "We didn't realize the power that the Iranians have with their missiles." And so I think that, the Israelis can't back down. it would actually amount to a strategic defeat, and not only that, a loss of face and the end of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, and I read they have only a few more days of interception rockets left. So it's a matter of time before the US really steps in. Of course, the US has already been supporting with arms and intelligence, but it seems a matter of even when we record this podcast, today it's the Thursday, the 19th of June, but very likely the US will step in over the next few days. Do you agree?
I'm about 50-50 on that. I don't, at the moment, the messaging from Trump seems like they will step in, but I don't really understand whether Trump is doing the usual Trump things where he advertises that he's going to do something, but he has no intention of actually doing it. And I think that the only thing, Americans have seen the effectiveness of Iranian response, so that should pour a very cold shower on their illusions that they can change the equation in the region. And I think that the only way that they could reverse this course of events is by using nuclear weapons. And I'm not sure that would reverse it either, but it would, let's say that they could either Israelis or the Americans with a nuclear missile could inflict very, very heavy damage on the Iranians. Now, will they do it or will they not do it? We don't know. But without using the nukes, they are on the road to defeat, and I think it's inevitable. And then, we have to also take into account that today, Iran, which has been preparing for this clash with the empire for more than 20 years and has very effective weapons, is not only a much more powerful adversary than the Taliban in Afghanistan and the Ansar Allah in Yemen, both groups which have defeated the American power. Iran also has support from Pakistan, from China, and from Russia. And then there's also very, very tense situation in Turkey, in Jordan, and in Egypt, where you could see a regime change in Jordan. You could see a social uprising there. You could, Erdogan is pretending that he's outraged with Israeli behavior, blah blah blah. But he's helping them at every turn, and so I think that at a given point in time, something might go down in Turkey and change the equation. And you mean
like an uprising in Turkey? Because I agree, Turkey and Israel together, they toppled Assad, right? So they were in cahoots when it comes to Syria. So do you expect in Turkey like an uprising, or
I don't expect one, but I think that one is always possible because we can't really tell, but there is very, very strong revolt among the ordinary Turks against Israel, and the Turkish government is aiding and abetting Israel in every sense. They're trading with them, they're supplying oil to them. They've taken down the Assad regime for chiefly benefiting Israel, and they are also participating in the defense of Israel against Iranian missiles. So they're helping Western powers take down Iranian missiles flying over Iraq. And so it's you can't be sure that nothing will change in Turkey, that things will remain as they are. And then in Egypt, you have General al-Sisi, who has been trying very, very hard to keep Israel out of it all. But the Egyptian population is also extremely revolted, and Egyptian military. And so at some point, it's going to take a drop to overflow everything, and then the whole dam will burst, and you're going to have an avalanche, which could result in a war between Israel and Egypt. And Israelis are behaving like there's no limitation of wars that they can engage in, but they're already engaged on 5 fronts. Can they take a sixth front, another major power in the region, and confront them?
Yeah, that's the thing, because I talked to quite a few analysts over the past year, people like Douglas McGregor, but also Mersheimer, and most of them said in advance, look, Israel cannot take on Hezbollah. They will be defeated by Hezbollah. But Israel basically took care of Hezbollah, is trying to take care of Hamas, of course, in an awful way in Gaza. But they seem to be successful now against Iran. So maybe you're underestimating Israel. Would that be possible?
No, I don't really think so. I think that Israel has a capable intelligence service. They have full-on support from Western intelligence services, so they're very effective in that sense. But they have their economy has been decimated. Their military is profoundly exhausted. They are increasingly, their troops are increasingly declining to serve, and they haven't even seen war yet. They're bombarding people around themselves. But wherever they have to engage in an actual war against an actual adversary, they're not doing so well. They've been, they thought they were going to take care of Hamas in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. Well, it's been more than 600 days, and they still haven't defeated Hamas. And by all accounts, Hamas today is stronger than Hamas was 2 years ago. Hezbollah, they've inflicted a devastating blow on Hezbollah, but Hezbollah has not been defeated. And you can see that by Lebanese internal politics, because the Western powers have been trying everything they can do to empower the Lebanese government sans Hezbollah, right? Without Hezbollah. Well, they're not even daring. The Lebanese are not even daring to disenfranchise Hezbollah, which tells you that they have real power, real political power in Lebanon. And I believe that they still have considerable military power. Well, okay, with the regime change in Syria, they are now they have to be underground in hibernation. But things in Syria will change. There's a very elevated risk of a civil war breaking out in Syria. And then you might find even actors like the United States with their proxies, the Kurds and the Free Syrian Army, whatever's left of it, actually in opposition to HTS, al-Jolani's government and the al-Nusra Front and all these merry jihadis that are now running amok in Syria. And then, you still have the Alawites, you still have Iranian proxy forces, you have still active cells of the Free Syrian Army, apparently in hiding around the mountains around Latakia and in Iraq. So there's no telling what might come out of this. And the Israelis can go, fly their aircraft and drop big bombs on everybody. But if anywhere their troops have to engage in trained, capable military forces like Hezbollah, like Hamas, and there's going to be more of that, they don't do so well. And I think that without Western support, Israel is finished. And Israel is finished. Israel wouldn't be able to do even what it's doing now if it wasn't for a non-stop conveyor belt of spare parts and ammunition coming from Germany, from the United States, from Great Britain, and other Western powers.
Yeah, and Iran is of course part of BRICS these days. I'm a little bit surprised about why BRICS is not at least openly helping out. Of course, the Chinese are famous for their non-interventionist policies, but are weapons being supplied by China and Russia to Iran? What's going on there behind the scenes?
I think that certain systems are being supplied to Iran, but I think that those are predominantly defensive systems, intelligence support, radar, anti-aircraft systems, things of that nature. I think that they share intelligence, that I think that from the point of view of Russia and China, their chief concern is to defend the Iranian government, not necessarily to go fight Iran's war for them. So I don't see that they will engage in military confrontations against Israel or any Western power supporting Israel. But they will prop up the Iranian government. And so in that sense, I think that both the Russians and the Chinese are already active. And then we've seen that the Chinese have, for example, been supplying weapon systems to Egypt. And that's, that's indirect help, but it's very important because one of the things that has paralyzed Egypt is their heavy dependence on the United States for military support. And of course, the price of that military support is you never touch Israel. So you have to remain out of these conflicts. Or else we're going to cut your military support. Well, it seems that the Chinese are stepping in to be able to wean Egypt off of that dependency.
Yeah, smart from Egypt's point of view to have two different strategies at the same time there. And
yes.
What about? So you already mentioned the Israel's nukes. They have the Samson option, of course. When their state, when the existence of their state is threatened, they reserve the rights for themselves to use nukes. But if Israel would do that, then they would also, at least they would lose support of Europeans, I would say. And then they will become completely isolated almost. I guess also in the US, because it's already close in the US. There's so many people, of course, not happy with Netanyahu's policies. And the Israel lobby is strong. But if they would start using nukes, then wouldn't they isolate themselves completely?
I think that they would probably further the damage to themselves, in terms of reputation and isolation. But whether they would lose the support of the Europeans, the Europeans don't seem to have a problem with them committing genocide against the Palestinians. So what's a nuke or two on top of that against the Iranians? I'm sure that people like Mark Rutte and Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas and people of that caliber, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, would find a way to say, well, the nuke, that's not very nice, but Israel has the right to defend herself, and we stand with Israel, and we urge all sides to
de-escalate
and to exercise utmost restraint, blah, 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 blah. Of course, the people in all of these countries would be appalled, but the people in government in these countries don't represent the people at all. They represent Western centers of power, the money-lending oligarchies who, don't have the slightest problem with depopulation. They've done it again and again and again over centuries. They've depopulated huge stretches of the world, 90 to 95% of all Australian Aborigines, 90% of all Native American peoples. Tasmania natives are gone. Caribbean natives are gone, 100%. So, what's the big fuss about depopulating the Persians from Iran? It's, the chief problem would be how to PR it, how to sell it to the public.
Yeah, and Trump was elected on a peace platform, but he seems to turn his back on peace and join the empire again. Do you expect MAGA to fall apart? Because people like Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Tulsi Gabbard, they all don't agree with intervening in Iran. So what's the future of MAGA after Trump does decide to attack Iran?
I genuinely don't know, Paul. I'm deeply perplexed about Trump's conduct of things. He seems to have alienated everybody that supported him, and apart from the people who have the TLS syndrome, Trump loyalty syndrome, the opposite of Trump derangement syndrome. There are some people who think that Trump can do no wrong, and if Trump, eats little babies for breakfast, they're going to come up with a reason why that's awesome and Trump is the best. But Trump does have a track record of raising tensions and escalating this suspense and uncertainty to the max, and then doing something very different from what everybody expected him to do. So I think that we will know more after the 4th of July, because the 4th of July is when this big, beautiful bill is supposed to be going through the Senate. And I think that I could be wrong. I think Tom Luongo will understand this situation better. But it seems to me that for as long as Trump remains on this anti-Iran track, that he has a much better chance of getting that big, beautiful bill passed. And once he does, I think that he will solidify his political backing, and he will be politically much less vulnerable, and that we will only find out his real intentions after that happens.
Yeah. It's interesting because Tom Luongo, I've had him on the show twice, and he was actually the one that told me that I need to talk to you because you know so much about also European banking interests. But do you think Tom suffers from TLS then, or?
No, I don't think so. I think that Tom just tries to read between the lines this situation. He tries to understand the actual motivations and incentives of actors in the game. That's not being discussed in the media, to see where the forces of financial and political powers are pointing towards. And I think that there is, because Trump is obviously engaging in some kind of a game of deception. And in that case, it's quite difficult to say who is the ultimate dupe in that deception. Is it the people in the first row, or is it the people in the second row? And I think that, as things stand now, let's say that if we read the tea leaves of the current situation, Trump is alienating everybody who supported him. Almost. And he's actually making massive favors to everybody who was attacking him for 8 years, right? He's working in favor of people like people from the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Adam Schiff. All the neocons are now thrilled with Trump. And it's exactly the same people who have been dragging him from court case to court case, trying to impeach him multiple times, demonized him in the media 24/7, nonstop. And now suddenly he's giving them the biggest Christmas gift that they could possibly dream about. Or is Trump setting them up for a fall? Because he is a vengeful person. He doesn't reward harm done to him. He seeks to get back at people who have harmed him in the past. So I don't know. My personal theory is either is that, or they got to him. And I think that if they got to him, it's probably not money. It's probably not like, hey, if you go along with us, you're going to make a lot I don't think
it's more something like Elon Musk said, perhaps, possibly related to the Epstein files, or they got something on him, I guess.
I don't think it's even that. My money would be on the possibility that they told him, look, you go against us, we're going to kill your whole family. Your children, your grandchildren, we'll kill all of them. And, if the other side is good at one thing, they're good at killing people. And, the fact that he's the president is not an obstacle in any sense. They've killed JFK, they've killed RFK, they've killed many other high-level politicians and presidents. So it's not a problem to conduct political assassinations, and the stakes are so high that they might be that desperate and that determined. So I think either he's playing a double game, or they got to him, or I guess the third possibility would be that he just turned 79, that maybe he's not at his best, he's not at his sharpest, he's tired, exhausted, and the people around him are exerting powerful influence on him, and he's kind of let himself be led into a direction that he didn't intend to in the beginning. But now he has to own it. He can't come out and say like, "Oh, I didn't mean anything by this. They duped me." No, you have to, if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to pretend that you have things in control, now you have to own the mess.
Yeah. What I also wondered is Russia was getting quite a few drones from Iran, even also missiles, I think, especially these Shahed drones were, as far as I understand, quite important for Russia. Do you think that supply dried up now because of the situation there? And how difficult is that for Russia to operate without those drones?
I don't think that's a problem for Russia. Russia's military production is 3 times the military production of the whole of NATO combined, including the United States. So they have ample supplies, and they took the Shahed drone designs, and since they have advanced them quite considerably. They've increased their range. They've increased the payload. They added jet engines on some of them rather than the propeller thing. They've added, I think, allegedly, they added AI recognition of targets. And so I think that while initially they purchased Shahed drones from Iran, I think that the Russians are producing them themselves now. And it's not a complicated thing. When it comes to things like Kinjal, these very advanced hypersonic missiles, it's an elaborate, complex production process. So they can only produce so many in a year. These drones are simple, so you can produce probably hundreds every day. I don't see that supply of drones would be an issue.
And is Russia the winner in all of this? Because the world is now focused on Iran, so not so much on Russia anymore. Oil prices could potentially spike because of what's going on, especially when they decide to close the Strait of Hormuz. So higher oil prices would be a good thing for Russia, despite all the sanctions. So could Russia be the winner here in a sense?
Yeah, in a sense, Russia could be a winner, unless the regime in Iran fails, unless there's a regime change in Iran. So if the regime in Iran preserves itself, then yes, Russia in a number of ways will be a winner. We've seen that already. Military supplies to Ukraine has almost completely dried up. So they're not receiving supplies of weapons from the United States, and it's a huge problem for the Ukrainians. The world's attention has shifted away from Ukraine, so they don't even get the due support in Western media, and yeah, if the price of oil spikes, that's a net benefit to Russia as well.
Yeah. Interesting times. Could you also share a little bit more about who's actually in control? And because we already talked a lot about what's going on, but behind the scenes, you already mentioned the European banks, American banks. But if you go one step higher in the food chain, who's really pulling the strings here?
Well, the controlling owners of that bank, which are these oligarchic hereditary families. I don't know who they all are, but there's a limited number of them. There's a small number of them. It seems to me that the name Rothschilds comes up a lot, and so either they're the top dog there, or they are the how do you call it? One of the maybe they're the CEO of the operation. they control the thing, but they're not the only ones who are the beneficial owners of the whole structure. And I think that the actual, let's call it philosophical, psychological, strategic headquarters is always the City of London, because any issue you look into, whether it be war in Yemen, war in Israel, war in Ukraine, the likely future wars in the Balkans, you always see that the British secret services, British special forces, and British secret diplomacy is preparing the terrain and defining the strategy. The Americans kind of come in when you need blunt force to be applied. But if there's no need for blunt force, generally it's the Brits who take control. And so now you have, for example, in the Balkans, nothing much has happened yet, but the tensions are rising. And if you speak to Bosnian politicians and journalists, they all say the place is overrun by Brits. In Damascus today, according to Vanessa Beeley's reporting, all the 4-star hotel in Damascus are now chock full of British officers and NGOs and actors like this. And they are, in their various correspondence and papers and policy documents, they are explicitly talking about taking control of the region, about reestablishing British control east of Suez. They really are intent on controlling Syria for the long term and trying to spread, their colonial hegemony in a similar way as they had it in the 19th century. Same thing.
So are they trying then to reinstall or revive the British Empire, or are these families just using London as a conduit to exert their power globally, and they don't give a shit about Britain? Because Britain itself is its economy is in shambles. There's a lot of internal strife within the country. So do they care about Britain at all, or
No.
they're just using London as a way to, like I said, to exert their influence and to pull the strings?
Yeah, they couldn't care less about the British people and the rest of Britain, and it's like, in the heyday, at the zenith of the British Empire, well, if you read Charles Dickens' novels, you know that most of the British people in Britain were living in squalor and misery, and that it was only a certain, let's call it the 1%, who benefited from, the business of the British Empire. I think that they have this old entrenched traditional setup in Britain. They have a whole jurisdiction that's off limits to anybody. The City of London, where they, these banking families basically define their rule. They exert influence through financial control. I think they still control very, very large amounts of financial assets around the world. They've plundered very large amounts of gold from everywhere around the world. When they, for example, when they regime changed Ukraine, then in the following few days after the coup, between 30 and 40 tons of Ukrainian gold was just flown out of Ukraine. When the Soviet Union collapsed, they had about 1,500 tons of gold in the government treasury. All of it disappeared. When they took down Gaddafi, about 140 tons of gold from Libya was flown out. So, they control considerable wealth, but they don't control large armies. Instead, they act through special forces, rapid deployment forces that they can bring anywhere to effect regime change, acts of terror, acts of sabotage to destabilize target governments. And then they use a very extensive network of secret diplomacy, meaning they deploy these. Generally, they work through NGOs, non-government organizations, but these non-government organizations tend to be in very close coordination with the Foreign Office and the MI6. And then they will come into a target country through these NGOs and charitable organizations. So they will fund the media, they will fund the educational programs, but these will be fronts that actually serve as information gathering, so that they learn the pressure nodes in the society, when it's necessary, where they have to exert influence to affect political change. And then they work very hard on public relations projects, so that when let's say if you read the documents from RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, which is one of the two dominant think tanks in the United Kingdom, they say that the Balkans are inevitably going to be the second front in the conflict between the West and Russia. And you see that they are, through their PR work, they have now convinced 60% of the Bosnian population that their chief political threat comes from Russia. And so they're very good and very effective at this. And then they're very good at triggering wars. Because today, if you listen to Bosnian politicians and these media people, even in the alternative media, they're all convinced that no, there's not going to be war here. Nobody wants to go to war. Nobody's interested in war. But for British intelligence agencies, triggering war is like drinking water for us. It's nothing to them. All you have to do is organize a group of thugs to commit a massacre. Let's say you find a group of Croatian thugs, you pay them money to commit a massacre against a group of completely innocent Muslim civilians, right? And then you get a bunch of Muslim thugs to exact revenge and commit a bigger massacre of Croatian civilians somewhere. I mean, they've done this thousands of times anywhere in the world. Yeah. And then you get, it's that story of ants in a jar, where they say if you put 100 black ants and 100 red ants into a jar, you close it and you observe what happens. Nothing happens. Ants go about their business. But then if you shake the jar up violently, then the ants become alarmed. Something's gone terribly wrong. And then they see the other and they are like, oh, it must be the red guys. So the ants start killing each other at that point. So it seems to me that the British, through their, colonial period, the British Empire, have perfected the methods of shaking the jar wherever they need to take over something. And this is their divide and rule approach. And it seems to me that this is where I think that if you could quarantine that system, if you could quarantine the influence of the British foreign policy establishment in the world, that probably 90, if not 100% of all the world's problem would just dissipate and disappear from the world.
Interesting perspective. Thanks, Alex. I know I've already taken up a lot of your time, but one final question, especially for my audience who's also interested in investing and preparing financially. Would it be a good moment now to go long oil, also given your experience as an oil trader and what's going on in the Middle East? Would that be a right move as an investor?
It may be. I mean, I don't know this. I don't do prediction because my track record is 50-50. Sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes I'm right. But I have developed already 20 some years ago a trend following model, which basically gives you signals when it detects that a trend in something has reversed. And so just last week we had a reversal on oil. So we were net short for months on crude oil, and now at some point last week, a lot of those strategies reversed direction, and now we are net long. So from that point of view, it definitely looks like the trend of oil prices may have reversed. And then there's the risk that something goes badly wrong in the Persian Gulf. Oil could go into triple digits, above $100 a barrel, maybe $200 a barrel. There's no telling, because it's in uncharted territories.
Yeah.
So I think that definitely having exposure to energy markets in general is not a bad idea. It should be considered. And I would also add natural gas, because natural gas has been living in its own universe, always kind of bouncing off of all-time historical lows, especially if you adjust for inflation. It's just, the American oil contracts, NYMEX natural gas. NYMEX natural gas. And now we've had a reversal there too. So we are also net long natural gas, and it's already a profitable position. And it's still low. I mean, I think natural gas right now is trading at about $3.60 per, I think, 10,000 British thermal units. The upside is probably towards $10, $15, $20. So that thing could happen quickly.
Okay, interesting advice. Thanks so much, Alex, for your time. And where can viewers find more about you? How can they best follow you?
So on Substack, I have 2 publications. One of them is a daily trend following newsletter called iSystem Trend Following. iSystem is this model that I developed, so it's the newsletter is based on that. And then I have a personal Substack called Alex Krainer Substack, where I publish less frequently, but generally it tends to be a more thoroughly researched articles and maybe more refined prose. And I'm fairly active on X. My handle is @nakedhedgy. So
I'll put all the links in the description. Yeah. Thanks a lot, and would love to do it again in the future.
Absolutely, with pleasure. Thank you for having me, Paul, and warm greetings to everyone out there from Croatia today.
Thank you.
Take care.